In the past, you have said that you support having background checks across the board, given what the King-Thompson legislation would accomplish. And your previous statements, why haven't you signed on as a co-sponsor for the King-Thompson bill, especially since 88% of your constituents support background checks for all gun sales?
Thanks. I mean, same question that I think Teresa asked, somebody asked at our Spring Valley town hall a few months back. Look, I believe that if you're buying a gun, I don't care where you buy it, you should have to undergo a background check. Whether it's at a gun store, whether it's from an individual, whether it's at a gun show. In Nevada, the loophole, the gray area is individual person-to-person sales. Because if you buy at a gun show here in Nevada, you actually have to get a background check at a gun show. The concern that I have, and why I have not co-sponsored that bill, and I've talked to Mike Thompson about it and Peter King about it, is that I would like to see there be a way that the two individuals that are conducting the transaction, the private individuals conducting the transaction, should be able to go to some web portal and enter some demographic information on the buyer, and then be able to say yes or no, they're eligible to buy a gun, as opposed to two individuals, a buyer and a seller, needing to meet up at a federal firearms licensee, paying for the background check, paying for the transfer fee, and everything else that goes with selling the gun. So I've actually talked to Mike and Pete about trying to work that into their bill, saying, look, let's move the bill with the provisions on background checks for gun shows, so it's national gun shows, gun stores, and let's put in place a provision that requires the person-to-person sales to take, background checks to take place when there's a web portal available for an individual to be able to utilize it.
194.
Marshall had asked a question, but I just didn't know the first. Do you think that immigration should really be a pathway to citizenship?
In the Senate bill is one that was a reasonable approach. But that doesn't mean, if I'm given a choice of voting for a pathway to legalization and voting for a path to nothing, I'll vote for a pathway to legalization. But I'm on record as saying I would support a pathway to citizenship similar to the one that's in the Senate bill.
But for all immigrants?
Right. The one that's in the, yeah, but that's what's in the Senate bill.
I'm really surprised that it's still the same answer to background checks. As time goes on, the lack of background checks is costing lives in Nevada and elsewhere. State of Missouri saw a 25% increase in homicide by firearms since they took away a more comprehensive background check law they had in place. Looking at data, I think from 2007 and 2011, and I looked inside it. It's correct data, I'm sure. You know, here in Nevada, we're in the top 10 for deaths by gun violence year on year on year on year. We're in the top 5 for intimate partner homicide, women killed by intimate partners with firearms, and many of those guns are bought without background checks. And I don't know why we need to wait for an online portal. I spent 2 hours after you mentioned that searching for information about it. Is it an amendment to the bill? And I could find nothing. It seems like it's just something you're saying to take the issue and put it on a shelf instead of addressing it directly.
Well, Teresa, the answer is the same because your question is the same, and the position doesn't change. So, you know, the fact is, if we want to address the issue of gun violence, it's got to be a much more holistic approach than just background checks. Background checks are a piece of it. But the fact is, the vast majority of gun violence is perpetrated by individuals with a gun that's been purchased legally, that has gone through a background check, not from a gun that was purchased off the street or purchased without a background check. So that's number one. But we've got to do a lot better. One, we got to get all the records necessary to run adequate background checks into the database. There's a huge deficit, especially when it comes to mental health information in that repository, so that you can run a background check and get it, it's an okay to sell a gun to somebody, and that could be the wrong answer because the database is faulty. So we have to make sure the information is adequate. We have to prosecute those people that commit perjury when they try to buy a gun and check the form off and say that they're eligible to buy a gun or answer no to all the questions, when in fact they have committed a felony or they do have a restraining order or all those other things. We don't prosecute probably 10% of those that fraudulently fill out the forms. We've got to make sure that those that need mental health services get mental health services. I mean, that's been a big issue here in Southern Nevada, especially in light of what's been going on over across in Neal. So there's a lot of things that we need to do, and background checks are a part of it. And I'm willing to work to get to that point. And I've worked, as I've mentioned, I've talked to. Now the bill hasn't come to the floor, so it hasn't even had a hearing in a committee. So there's no opportunity to offer an amendment until it's heard. But I have talked with both Mr. Thompson and Mr. King about my proposal. And if the bill gets a hearing in committee, or if it comes to the floor, I would offer that amendment.
I just want to say I'm aware it's a complex issue, and I could meet, each and every one of the points. I agree that the problem with data and not prosecuting, but the fact is the TFE went without a director for 6 or 7 years and has been hampered. Fact is, funding for the types of things you're talking about has been hampered. The fact is, the background checks bill that
Teresa, I understand where you're coming from. I know this is an issue that you're passionate about, but the position that I've stated today is the position I've had throughout this debate. It's the position that I will continue to have throughout this debate. I'm willing to address the issue in a holistic approach. I'm working with the sponsor of those bills to try to get the piece that I feel is important in there. And should the bill come to committee or come to the floor, then I will take the action necessary to get that in there.
Where we stand with getting a hearing into your.
I'll repeat the question.
Okay. Getting a hearing.
The question's on the Common Core curriculum, the individual proponent of Common Core. And there's been a lot that's happened with Common Core over the last several months. In fact, I think it was just in the paper today that the National Education Association is backing off of Common Core. My position on Common Core, I believe that a diploma should mean the same thing regardless of where it comes from. Right? If you graduate from Clark County School District or you graduate from a school in New York or in California, your diploma should mean roughly the same thing. If you've got a basic understanding, I mean, if you're gonna, I know that's not the way it is, but that's what it should be. Common Core was an attempt to try to address that. When Common Core was developed, it was supposed to be voluntary to the states. Unfortunately, it was used as a carrot on the Race to the Top Fund programs, that if your state wanted to apply for a grant for Race to the Top Fund, one of the things you had to do was adopt Common Core. So it was no longer voluntary. If you wanted to try to get that extra money, you had to adopt it. Nevada did that. We adopted Common Core, we applied for the grant, and we didn't get the grant, but we did get Common Core. And I think the issues with Common Core is that there's no flexibility in the program. You're allowed to add 15% different to the curriculum, but you can't take anything out of the curriculum. I don't think it takes into account the issues that are reflected in individual school districts in different communities around the country. I'm not a supporter of Common Core as it is with the nationalized testing program. And that's one of the reasons why most teacher organizations right now around the country are backing away from Common Core, is that they don't like the national testing programs either. Really what we've done is we've changed what was under NCLB for a new Common Core, which is still nationalized testing. So because I sit on the Education Committee, I've requested a committee hearing on the status of Common Core across the country. I'm working with Chairman Klein to try to get that. No date has been scheduled. We're trying to work to get it scheduled, hopefully sometime this spring.